Okay, so this evening's topic is about engaging with MPs, councillors, and the media. This is because, in the light of some of the things we've been discussing this week around the political situation and understanding how there's a turning of the tide in terms of parents, home education, freedom to choose how children are educating, that we need to do more campaigning, we need to win people over. And so this is something we do need to talk about, and we've invited Dr. Brian Ray, who is from the United States, where they have had to engage with state officials for many years now, and hopefully he can share with us some of the approaches that worked, and we can learn a bit from him, and then we'll open up to the panel. So I'm going to spotlight Brian right now. If you could all just make sure you stay muted. Do you want the chat enabled, Brian, to collect questions?
I think go ahead and enable it, but
yeah,
how about you all watch it, because I'm not good at multitasking.
That's fine. We can pick it up later. So we'll ignore it for now, but people can put questions in. Do you need to share screen?
I will in just a moment. I'm writing down something before I forget.
Okay, I'm just enabling
Sorry,
everything.
here we go.
No worries, it's fine.
Share screen. Thank you, everybody. It's great to be here. Ready, set, share. Does that look good? And then from the beginning, do I have a full screen now? Yeah, good. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm going to jump right into this, engaging with MPs, councillors. Is that properly spelled for England? Councillors, 2 L's? I don't know. And the media. Okay. And what I called this talk before on another occasion was how to be the driver in a media interview. So I'm trying to adapt this to, interacting with both journalists and representatives, that kind of thing. If anybody wants free homeschool research, go sign up at nary.org/connect. Here we go. Once upon a time. So you cannot always tell the age of somebody by his beard, but way back in 1988, I had just finished. I was right in the process of finishing my PhD, and the NBC television, which is one of the big networks in the United States, called up and said, "Hey, Dr. Ray, we want to have you on the show." Well, what's the deal here? I mean, I'd never done anything like that in my whole life. I was just a little nobody, recent graduate of the doctoral program, and they wanted to fly me from West Coast over to New York, pick me up in a limousine, bring me to the studio in the morning. Of course, 3 hours off. They had to put the powder on my face, all that kind of stuff. Before I went, I thought, what in the world am I going to do? So I called Mike Ferris, who is an attorney. He was one of the founders of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and he's now the CEO of the Alliance Defending Freedom, one of the best internationally known defenders of religious freedom in the world. Anyway, Mike had a lot more experience than I had at the time. And he said, "Brian, decide what you want to say, 2 or 3 main points, memorize it, and make sure you say that." The point is that there was going to be a 7-minute segment on national television with the president of the biggest teachers union in the nation, which I'm guessing is the biggest one in the world, and Brian, a nobody, and the moderator. So you have to divide 7 minutes into, maybe you're going to have 2 minutes to say something. And so that's what I did. I decided what my message was, and that's a whole long story, but I gave the message, and totally, absolutely, positively a success. So I want to talk about that a little bit today. The purpose of this presentation is to talk about how to talk with your MP or counselor or the media, and it's an opportunity to present a purposeful and a truthful message. Secondly, the media interviews will come to you or your organization, and how are you going to respond? So I want you to really think about this carefully. I'm looking for do I have a mute button somewhere? I don't know.
What do you need to mute?
Okay, I found it. So before we get to that cartoon, one of my all-time favorites. Home-based education has enjoyed tremendous growth and success I'm just giving a little context here, and many successes around the world. Research so far suggests many positive things about home education and very little negative on the balance. I mean, on the balance, it is very positive what is being found regarding homeschooling. But still, some people are concerned. For example, they want to control the worldview of children. Let's just face it. They do not like parents being able to control the worldview of children. Uh, they also want what they call safeguarding. I think that's a term you use there. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. We don't use that term, but it's the same kind of thing going on here. We might call it something like, well, on a less positive note, do-gooders. People trying to figure out everything. So we still have, even though we have all 40 years of research now, we still have some people worried that children will not be well socialized. And this is from over, how long ago is that? 22 years ago from Christianity Today. It's the year 2009, and Billy Harris is attending his 20-year homeschool reunion. So the idea was that Billy or Susie would be tied to mommy's apron strings forever, can never get out of the house. Now, I believe that that stereotype is dying, but that's another point. We also have academic and elite voices that are anti-parent-led education, who are in some ways becoming more frequent and pointed. For a while, they were rather quiet, but in the last few years, we've had more of them. And I'll just give you three quick examples. This was in 2003. Christopher Lubienski said, quote, "The accelerated movement toward homeschooling reflects a serious threat to the collective good, a threat encouraged by organized efforts to withdraw from common endeavors such as public education." Now, I mean, we could parse that one sentence for an hour. I think Sean and I could have fun with that one, and so could Randall. Here's one from Professors Dwyer and Peters. This is a very new book on the philosophy and history of homeschooling. Quote, this is the philosopher's, one of his assumptions, at least he's honest about this. The state must have the ultimate authority to determine what children's best interests are, close quote. Now, he admits that is a presupposition. You cannot prove that in any way, shape, or form. You know, we might call that a religious axiom. I don't know. And then one more. This is not a quote. This is a very brief summary of Professor Elizabeth Bartolet, who says that homeschooling must be presumptively banned, and then parents would have to prove why they should be allowed to home educate. And she repeatedly says it is a place where parents often go to neglect and abuse their children. Now, I have to say that these claims and many others have no empirical basis in any, listen carefully, body of research. I'm not saying you could not take one piece of information and come up with a claim like this, but there's no body of research that supports these claims. So the empirical evidence is on the side of those who believe in, and you, if some of you heard me the other day, I'm not sure I like the idea of the rights lingo, but parents' duty and authority, and typically we say the parental rights over educating and upbringing a child. So if you look at the empirical evidence, you could go to something like my review of research. This is not just a study by me. This is a review of research, a lot of research, 2017. Professor Joseph Murphy's review in 2012. And from what I can tell, we do need some more empirical evidence from the United Kingdom if we want to be able to have more empirical evidence on which to make statements and claims. So that's something to get into. This is still how I wait for for those who are philosophically anti-parental rights, in a sense, this is still kind of where they are. Got the empty table with evidence homeschooling is bad, and the reporter will sometimes say, what more evidence do we need? Homeschoolers are hiding something. And then you look at the table with a pile of evidence that homeschooled children and adults who are home educated are doing fine, but they just kind of ignore that. I think there's a philosophy behind this. I don't think it's real scholarship. So with all of that, however, the challenge is real and you cannot escape it. So let's take one of the most difficult things we have. Quote, homeschooled boy, 13, weighed 65 pounds when he escaped parents. September 11, 2019, in the United States. And I know that you have had some stories like this on your side of the pond. I know you've had some stories. And when you hear that, the first thing, for those who believe parents have a right, so to speak, of deciding how to educate their children, you just cringe at this because it's a horribly negative, tragic, bad, evil situation. First of all, you have to start with an allegation, and then sometimes the parents are found guilty. They go through the jurisprudence process and they're guilty. They have done something evil. And some of them were allegedly homeschooling, and a very few of them were actually what we would say legally homeschooling. So you just have to deal with it. So what do we do when we talk with, and I want to insert here something I was writing down before we started. It was back in roughly 30 years ago. This is a very official presentation here. I have it on my little pink slip. I wrote some notes before we started, just as we were starting. About 30 years ago, reflecting back on Michael Ferris, who I mentioned, he said, and Mike is just incredible at foreseeing things. He has a knack for it. He's a brilliant man, and I think he's a great personality. I like Mike. Can make a commercial, couldn't I? I like Mike. So anyway, Mike said way back then, what those who believe in the parents' duty, responsibility, right to decide a child's education upbringing, they need to do two things. One, they need to go in and meet their legislators. You call them what? MPs, councillors. They need to meet them in person. And they need to bring their children with them, because their children are the best argument for home education. Now, sorry, mom and dad, if you have a crazy, wild, out of control child, don't bring that one. But really, most home educated children are pretty enjoyable to be around. I mean, that's my experience with thousands of families. Most of them are pretty enjoyable to be around. And number two, Mike said, remember, this is about 33 years ago. He said, we need good, solid, well done research to present empirical evidence to the world. And Mike is just as correct today as he was 31 years ago. I really, really believe this. And this is connected to what I'm talking about here. First of all, be caring, act caring, talk caring, and have a caring tone, not a defensive or aggressive tone. So you've got to get yourself under control. Take 5 deep breaths. And it does not mean you cannot be a little bit passionate or a little bit definite, but you've got to watch yourself. You've got to watch your tone. Number two, if you're going to talk with a journalist, the media, or a policymaker, or an MP, or somebody, try to get inside the head and the thinking of this person. This is something, a lot of these things I'm talking about, I've learned over the past 30 so years. And it's really fun, actually. And I find it to be very good and helpful. I often ask the journalist, how did you get involved in this story? Like, I try to jump in before they do, okay? And you could do this with email, you could do this in person. How long have you been with this newspaper or this TV station or this whatever? How long have you been an MP? How long have you been a counselor? You want to understand this person, because you can develop, although we're not talking about a deep friendship here, you can develop a little bit of a relationship. How familiar are you with home education? Its practice, its laws? Do you have any personal experience with families and or graduates of home education? I believe it's extremely important to use your words carefully. And I know that you folks use the term home education. I actually really like that term. Years ago, we had no idea what this thing was going to be called. I still have and sell and develop and continually develop something it was called long ago, and it's still called Home-Centered Learning Annotated Bibliography, because we didn't know back then what it would be called. But you guys kind of settled on home education. The US settled on homeschooling. There are all kinds of debates about that. It's clunky, it's a little bit over worded, but I like something like parent-directed or parent-led home-based education. You see, there's a message in that, is there not? It's parent-directed. It's not government-directed. And for most of us, most people, it's not child-directed, even though we could talk about that. I don't think down at the deepest level, any parent really lets a child direct his or her own education. I just don't think it really happens. But anyway, I can have fun debating with the unschoolers, all right? That's okay. And it's home-based. It's not only at home. It's not tied to mommies and daddies' apron strings till they're 30 years old. So you see what I'm getting at? You need to use the language that means something and is honest and truthful and comes from your worldview. Number 3, and this is related to number 2. When you're talking with your MP, counselor, or the journalist, be ready to make educative or philosophical points. For example, I'm sorry, I'm very US centric. I'm sorry, I'm blind, but you can fill in the blanks, all right? I just don't know how to explain it for y'all, but for the United States, we still have a strong, even though it looks like we've totally lost it, we are the land of the free and the home of the brave, okay? So I get my flag, Juliet, wave my flag. But I love traveling too. So we believe in personal responsibility of all persons, every person, brown, white, black, rich, poor, long, straight hair, curly hair, is innocent until proven guilty. We do not presume guilt. We do not presume evil doing. All right? There's no discrimination, no profiling, and no bigotry toward any group. It doesn't matter whether it's a group that's chosen to be the main educators of their families or their children, a group with a certain skin color or certain kind of hair. We don't profile. And if you explain that, and I'm pretty blunt about it with journalists, we don't take dark-skinned people and then randomly stop their cars and search them because they have a higher incidence of crime in the inner city. We don't do that. It's wrong. Some people claim we do, but let's just say what we should not be doing. Parents love their children more than does anyone else, more than an MP, more than a counselor, more than a journalist, more than a lawmaker, more than a president, more than a prime minister. Okay, number 4. Now this is, you got to really control yourself. Make sure, do your best. I should say that. Do your best that everything that you give to him or her is printable. You're on the spot here. Watch yourself. Number 5, use your own terminology and worldview, and do not fall prey to the other side's terminology. Now, some of you are very, let's say, academic. You're quick on your feet. You're articulate. You know how to frame things, and you can be wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove, and use some terminology that they like to use, okay? But be careful. Don't just think, oh, if I'm so nice and I use their terms, it's all going to be fine. No, if you're not careful, they're going to use the terms you use, which are their terms, to work against your worldview. You might say, what in the world are you talking about, Brian? Well, if we have time, we can get into that, all right? Just be careful with your terminology. Okay, Juliet, will you flash me about how many minutes left? Give me a little help here. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So more or less she's saying, okay, thank you. Number 6, we're doing fine. I'm doing fine, I think. Number 6, make evidence-based points whenever you can and give the citations and references. You want to be honest. You want to be dependable. You want to be trustworthy. Don't just fly off the handle and make up things or give these ambiguous summaries that you cannot back up. Be ready, all right? So some of your claims are going to be evidence-based, as in tangible evidence-based. Some of your claims are going to be philosophically based, okay? But for either one, be ready to defend them, all right? If it's a philosophical claim, admit it. Just like philosopher Dwyer in his book, I want to say a positive thing about him. He admitted that his statement, remember, was the state must be the final authority over a child's whatever interest. At least he was honest and said that was an assumption, which means that's a faith-based idea. Okay, he might not want to say that he's faith-based, but he is. We all are, in a sense. All right, no matter what, no matter whether we're agnostics, atheists, secular, natural, metaphysical, naturalists, Christians, Muslims, Mormons, Jews. In a sense, we all have axioms that are not provable, but be ready. So, for example, we could say here in the US, back to the US, the rate of child abuse and neglect fatalities is 67%, are 67% higher among those not homeschooled than homeschooled. Now, this is kind of shocking because the academics who were sort of on a different side of certain things here, no, that doesn't exist. All right. For the little bit of evidence we have, this is documentable. All right. This is a little bit of evidence. Here's another one. About 5 million. This is just incredible. About 5 million of today's US public school students will be sexually maltreated by public school personnel such as teachers, coaches, administrators, custodians by the time they finish high school here. Plus, more will be physically, sexually, and psychologically abused or bullied by other students. Plus, more will be abused, neglected, or killed by their parents. They say, why did you get that? Okay, this is pretty potent. Department of Justice 2017. Plus, logic, everybody knows some are also abused by their parents and some are also abused by peers. We know that. And it's documentable. And this links to nary.org, but I link there to the Department of Justice. So, just a couple of more. Research shows no correlation between the degree of control of homeschooling by the government and the rate of abuse in homeschooling, which is already very, 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 very small as best we know. And this is based on empirical evidence. And I've linked to it here at nary.org. So again, we do not have much research on this, but what we do have is documentable and citable. And you need to be ready with that. If you don't do that, I'm sorry, you're going to be in trouble. And I'll tell you that we have people like Professor Bartolet saying, oh, but there's all this evidence. Go to the Connecticut, she calls it research, and go to the study by Knox et al. On torture. And you, by the way, you've got to be ready because you have to have somebody in your organization who has read those studies, or at least you have read a very, very, very dependable source who summarizes the study for you. If you don't do that, you're in trouble. Now, I could spend a lot of time right now talking about it's not a Connecticut study, it's a Connecticut report. It's by the government of Connecticut, and it's a report. It is not a research study. And the Knox one on torture is also something we could talk about, but it is not a representative sample of homeschool families in any way, shape, or form. And the researchers make that clear. So you've got to be ready with that. You've got to know this stuff. And you say, this is a lot of work, Brian. It is a lot of work. But not every homeschool parent has to do this. But people who represent your organizations have got to do this, must do this, have to do this. There are no evidence-based commissions or reports that have found homeschooling to be a statistically significant risk factor for child abuse, neglect, or murder. Okay, we have federal government reports and we have some other nonprofit reports. None of them at this point have said that home education is a risk factor. So this is all documentable. I did not document it there, but I can. Okay, a little bit more. Number 6, follow up your interview or your visit, if you can, within an hour. Okay, if you're dealing with a journalist, oh, I forgot to say this, journalists. Some of you know this, I know some of you know this. But if a journalist contacts you or your organization, you really, truly, must, absolutely, what else can I say? It's urgent. You need to contact back. You need to follow up and respond if you can within minutes. Within minutes. Really, I'm talking at the front end. If they contact you, you've got to be ready. You've got to call them back. And you know, most of you know, I don't know how many of you know, a lot of you know, journalists are sort of like hyperactive and they have deadlines. And if you do not respond, guess what? They're going to go to somebody else. To whom do you want them to go? Now, back to after the conversation with your MP or counselor or the journalist, this 1 hour thing is more important with journalists, but hey, do it with your MPs also. Follow up within an hour. With email is still the professional way, okay? It is still, from what I understand, doing research on communication. Emails still it, but hey, you may use other things too, but email's still it. Summarize your points along with your references and citations. Now, you don't be overbearing about this, but especially if you think you are not clear. Well, there's so many things I want to talk about here, but you remember I said earlier, make sure that whatever you say is printable. That usually means, especially with a journalist, you need to be relatively brief and not verbose like I am being sometimes on these presentations for Learn Free. You need to be, man, oh man, you need to be succinct. Remember, if you could give them 1 or 2 sentence or 10 or 15-second quotes, that's like gold for them. Make any point that with your email, your email makes any point that you forgot or want to add. I mean, I do this all the time. And most journalists really appreciate this. They really do. You're helping them. Okay, just very quickly, in a United States nationwide homeschool leadership conference we had 2 autumns ago, we had a challenge. Our panelists, we as panelists, were supposed to try to give 3 sentences we would use in this particularly difficult situation that deals with child abuse and neglect and murder and all these things. So here was my stab at it. To say to a journalist or perhaps an MP, counselor, legislator, it is evil and tragic when any parent or teacher harms a child. Now, look how this is very carefully worded, all right? It is evil and tragic when any parent or teacher harms a child, and the person should be swiftly brought to justice and punished. Now, I believe that very deeply. And if you don't believe it, don't say it, okay? But it's important. And this recognizes that adults do evil things to children. Nobody's denying that. Nobody's hiding that. And it's possible. And I'll say things like, I don't know if that's in here, forget that. I will say things in my interviews like, whenever a public school parent or a private school parent or homeschool parent does an evil thing to a child, that is horrible and that's evil. But you notice, I don't let them focus on homeschoolers. I never let them focus on home educators. Never. And that's very important. And I already gave you this one. And this one really, some people will accuse me of being kind of like the switch and bait or the red herring here, but I think it's very relevant to the conversation, because if people really care whether home educating parents do evil things, if they really care, then they should really care about whether public school teachers and custodians and coaches do evil things to children, and whether public school parents do evil things to children. So I will bring up the statistic on what % of government school children are sexually maltreated. And I will also insert in this evidence-based comment number 2 here, I will also insert the little bit of evidence that we do have about abuse rates in different educational settings. And here's a third one. In a free nation like America, we do not profile and treat inequitably groups like Muslims and homeschoolers, and we assume that every person is innocent until proven guilty. There's another phrase that I've used a lot in the last 10 years, is that it is improper in a free nation to use schooling laws as a preemptive, a priori dragnet to try to catch people who might do something evil. And I don't know if you like that wording, but it's what I use. Okay, that's the end of this part. Juliet, back to you.
Thank you, Brian. Do you want to end your screen share there, or shall I just end it for you? Okay, great. We're back in. So I'm going to just spotlight your panelists tonight. Where's Sean gone?
We get.
Okay. So we want to chat a little bit and sort of see how can we maybe expand on this and look a little bit at what in the UK, the situations we're facing, what would be useful from our own experience and reports and different things that we've come across. So who wants to kick that one off?
Cool, I'll go first because I'm unmuted and I think we're still waiting for people to be unmuted. That was brilliant, Brian, absolutely brilliant. And literally, I should have been taking notes because there were so many things that you spoke about that I was just sat there going, yep, that's happening, yep, that's happening. I think for me, there was.
You should just say everything's recorded. It will be in the app later tonight.
Brilliant, because I can go back through that.
Yeah, exactly.
Messages,
all recorded.
Awesome. I think for me, kind of the things that really stick out. So was like when talking, whether that's through to MPs or to people in the media, is this thing around kind of like the using our words and choosing them very, very carefully and using your own terminology. Because I think, and I'm sure everybody here would agree, that in the UK, we have this thing where everybody uses homeschooling. And if, as soon as we start doing interviews or if we talk to MPs and that's what they're using, I found that I was, so I should say that I home educate my own children, but I'm an artist doing a photographic research project on alternative education, focused on home education. And when I've been contacting the media about it, I found that if I put home education, that I would have less people responding than if I was putting homeschooling. And so this is something that I think is kind of, it's like this fine line that we have to tread between wanting people to actually know what we're talking about and pay attention to what we're talking about, but at the same time, not falling prey to this, what you're saying about using their terminology, because obviously I appreciate it's different in the States to, you know, to hear and kind of what the different terms mean and stuff. But yeah, and then the other part was about using citations. Don't want to focus on the Elizabeth Bartholet interview, as I'm sure none of us do, but I was absolutely astounded during the first one that I watched of her, where all of these things were coming out and out from her saying that, you know, there was this and there was that, and it was all, as far as we could see at the time, just literally her own opinion being cited as this is reference, this is where I got it from, this, and nobody questions it. And I think so for me and what the work that I've done, it's really important. And I know for like some of the letters that we've done that have gone out to like to different organizations and stuff, really important that we actually have the research there and that we're able to cite it, because I think if we're going to try and call out the media or the, you know, government when they're having things, you know, interviews online that they're doing and stuff, if we're going to try and call them out not using evidence that is properly cited, then we need to make sure that we're doing it ourselves and that we're actually kind of always giving them this research that is here. It's and there's getting a lot more of it recently as well. But yeah, I don't have a question for anyone. I was just kind of like, yes, all the way through, you're talking about exactly what's happening here kind of thing. So yeah, it's lots of food for thought there, which I'm sure everyone will agree with.
And I think I liked Brian's points, that he put out these different points that we've kind of just spoken about, but he's broken them down into something we can actually use. Sean, have you got anything you want to add, contribute?
Yeah, definitely. And likewise, just as Becky has said, Brian, I found myself nodding my head all the way through everything you were saying. And there's a huge amount of experience there for us to draw upon. And in my case, it's shared experience. And I wanted to, really, there's two elements to this. You know, there's a branding issue, if you like, for home education, right? In fact, what we are faced with, I think, is an exercise in rebranding, which is something which I may try and talk about right now. And then perhaps later in the conversation, we can start to talk more specifically about what's the best way to have to get influence over an actual local council or over your personal MP. We can come on to that topic later. So the way I want to approach this topic of rebranding home education is by just walking through examples of other organizations that have done this, which in most cases I had some association with them, so I'm talking from personal experience, and highlight the individual things that they find most important, because I think for those people listening, at the end of it, it'll be a pick and mix. You'll be able to see that certain of those elements would work really well for home ed. And if we go back to, you know, when I was just a youngster, I was involved in the Northern Ireland peace process. And at that time, we had a terrorist organization called the IRA, which was telling everybody that it would not decommission its weapons because that was, first of all, unprecedented, and secondly, tantamount to surrender. And in addition to that, while they were on a temporary ceasefire, they were using physical violence against people in the form of punishment beatings, as they were called. And the organizations that were generating ideas for the peace process at that time used statistics to challenge the actions of this organization. So for instance, when Bill Clinton came to visit Northern Ireland, all of the punishment beatings stopped immediately the night before he arrived, and they began again the day after he left. And this was documented through hospital admissions. So using things like statistics, people were able to get the interest of journalists and establish the fact that there was indeed opposition to these people, and therefore contest this space. And that was also supported with academic research that said, you know, in fact, the IRA has decommissioned 3 times previously. And, you know, in places like El Salvador and Mozambique, people have decommissioned without surrendering. So it's not actually tantamount to surrender. And that, you know, so that was something, statistics and academic research. In community regeneration, it's often about values, because poor communities are seen and judged often in very moralistic terms, and new charities which are trying to establish themselves, they you know, they've got to get a foot in the door. So some of the messages are that you can trust us. For instance, you know, we really understand local needs. We are very innovative in this sector, and you know, phrases like that could be adapted and used by a home education community to establish their own you know, place in society as well. With a subject such as fostering or adoption, it's about visibility, it's about emotions, and that can be used. You can use photography very well in that context to raise a profile. With some organizations, you're trying to get through to busy politicians, you know, in which case how you communicate to them has to be very time efficient, you know. So and when you pull all of these things together and you look at home education, there is a stunning lack of interest in the existing academic evidence that's there. We see local authorities frequently quoting really terrible research and absolutely ignoring quality research. So it's important that the home education community continues to supply that evidence And when a story appears, to go to that same journalist and say, I saw your story yesterday. Here's some evidence that you weren't presented with. I just want you to have it for next time. Visibility. Home educators are continually accused of hiding their children and being invisible to the state. So, you know, the home education community's annual picnics, when they take over parks and make themselves as visible as possible, is a really good example. Standing outside the Department of Education, holding up signs saying "We home educate," you know, they make for great photo opportunities again, and give you the opportunity, of course, to meet with politicians and civil servants. And I think most of all, values as well, because if you're giving a talk to local councillors, you will find, and I guarantee this, they think there's only one form of education, and that's schooling. And so if you're home educating, you're doing school at home. That's what they think, a classroom of one. So if you can, you know, express your values, tell them about world schooling, self-directed learning, unschooling, cooperative-based inquiry, you know, self-directed learning, all those things, express your values and demand that that difference be respected. So as a potted history there, I hope, you know, I hope I've set the scene, and later we can talk about how to specifically conduct a meeting with a councillor or an MP.
Juliet,
Yeah,
may I jump in here?
you can, and we have a hand up in the audience as well.
Here to shot what Son just went over. Yes, 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 yes. That was great, Sean. Just a little practical example. You kind of at the end there, you talked about the day in the park or whatever it is. Man, what a perfect opportunity to invite your MPs and councillors. You know, invite them down, give them a hot, well, I don't know what you do there. Here we can give them a hot dog, but I don't know what you give them there. In Oregon, so I'm in Oregon, and a lot of you, if you follow international news and US news, you know, you have an impression of Oregon. Well, I'll just say it's, the ones who are in charge are very left, very neo-Marxist, very whatever I'm not. So, but however, the homeschoolers, I think it's every 2 years. My office is just 5 blocks from the Oregon Capitol. Every 2 years they have apple pie day, and the home educators go in with their children. They set up tables in the Capitol. They bring homemade pies, and they bring a homemade pie to every single Oregon legislator. And the Oregon legislators always look forward to it. And that's how they know homeschoolers. It's incredible. It's an extremely positive thing. One other thing, in the US, and I don't know how it is in the UK, but, and you could read books on this by scholars, the Christian-run organizations have been the most organized, overall the most effective. They're the most visible. Of course, they're one of the easier ones to attack if you're not, you know, if you're not of that same religious worldview. But when it comes to the core ideas of parents in charge and the government not in charge of children, the Christians and the others, which like to call themselves the inclusives or the seculars or whatever you want to call it, they all get together, boom, like a tightly bound 3-fold cord when they go to our Capitol and our legislators, and they work well, extremely well together on those issues of the parental authority and choice in raising children. And then they go their ways for their picnic days and their all that.
Oopsie, did you mean to screen share there, Randall?
I don't think that was me, was it?
I think it was Randall. Let me just disable screen sharing
Okay.
just in case it's another accident, because we don't need to be hijacked by Randall tonight.
I'll be quiet for a moment.
Okay, can I get to Monica, who's raised her hand?
Thank you, Juliet. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
If somebody starts playing music behind me, let me know and I'll go for headphones or something. Just really quickly want to say, I have your book, Brian, and no, I don't have your book, because every time I meet a new home ed person, they want to borrow it. So it's, yeah, note to self, keep a notebook of where my books off my shelves are actually living. Really enjoyed your talk. Thank you so much. Sean, I'm shocked that I have never come across you before. I'm in Carlow in the south of Ireland, and 7-8 years ago, my late husband and I were in court for failing to cause our children, we've 6, but at that point it was 2, to attend schools because we refused to be assessed. So my first child was born in 1986. I have a 34-year-old who lives in Montana, and I have a 13-year-old. So my span is sort of 21 years. So yeah, we just basically stood up to the authorities, and we had a very good kind of a background because we were approved foster carers. So the state had given us 22 children over 10 years, 2 of whom we applied to home educate as well as our own, some of whom were in voluntary care and their parents wanted them to be home educated, or some of the parents wanted their children to attend school. So we figured we had a really good background to sort of stand up to the state. The legal advice we got at the time was that it wasn't a good idea to push it, that we would lose at the Supreme Court, basically. In Ireland, we have a constitution. Our constitution says parents are primary educators. It says they must provide education. So basically, we went to court at the local level. We were fined. We didn't pay the fine. We went to jail. I had 3 hours. In September 2014, my husband had 1 hour, and he was given dinner in 1 hour. I wasn't given a glass of water. So make of that what you will. But I just wanted to say that what we felt was helpful to us was that we spoke to every journalist who would speak to us, and we were incredibly open about everything. And what we got was, it was a learning curve for me in that the media who wanted to speak to us were very young. We were journalists just out of college. They were 22, 23. They didn't know home education was a right in the Irish Constitution, and they were really open to hearing about it. They weren't parents themselves. And they gave us really good press. So it was what we call in Ireland and England the red tops. It was sort of the tabloid press, gave us really good coverage, and the sort of mainstream media, papers of note, didn't.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important. I've done, I don't know how many interviews over the years. That notion you had, Brian, of 3 points that you want to get across, and no matter what a journalist asks you, no matter what a radio or TV interviewer will ask you, there's a whole media kind of training thing of like, well, I'm really glad you asked me that, but could I just say that? And you make sure you get your points in. And yeah, I think now when I'm asked to do a radio interview, which I am from time to time, I'm not actually speaking to the interviewer. I am hoping through the interviewer and through the medium of radio, television, or paper to get through to one parent out there whose child is unhappy in their school situation and whose parent is thinking, I'd really like to home educate, but maybe they're all weird, you know, hippies. And I'm actually thinking about somebody at home with an unhappy child who's thinking, home education sounds great, but I'm not sure I can do it.
Monica, have you had any sort of experience with media training? Do you know where we could look closer at that?
Media training, I guess it's all been on the job.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, we'd love to hear some notes. If you've got some notes, I think we'd love to see them. I don't
have any notes. What we did, I know that I've had over the years, so 4 of my 6 kids were born at home, which is really rare in Ireland. And I have debated the master of the National Maternity Hospital. That was probably my baptism of fire. And back in the day, so I'm talking real old school for younger parents, I apologize. We used to do on audio cassette. I used to record every interview that I heard. And so we went through an interview, my late husband Eddie and myself went through an interview where he had demolished a sociologist, a much more highly trained woman than I, and he had been really abusive to her, this master of the National Maternity Hospital in Ireland. And we went through the interview and we stopped the tape every 30 seconds. And my late husband Eddie said, if he asked you that, what are you going to say? If he asked you that, what are you going to say? So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So
thank you.
We're talking about very minority interests, and
Yeah.
find some way of making a connection with the people, because people do love their kids and they know their kids. A lot of them are unhappy in school.
Okay. Well, thank you, Monica. I just want to, we've got some comments and whatnot. Did you have a question, Brian?
Yeah, I've got a question for, I think Sean and Randall.
Okay.
Sean and Randall. In the
Randall
US,
in here.
is Randall there? Okay, yeah.
I'm adding in.
In the US, I would say that we are the homeschool groups. Now, I'm perfectly objective. I'm a researcher. I have no opinions, right? I'm just kidding. Okay, but I would say that the homeschool organizations, especially the Christian-run ones, are assertive. Okay, these are not timid people. They're assertive. They're proactive. They move forward. In Oregon, for example, for about 25 years, there's been a plan and a drive to continue moving toward more and more freedom in homeschooling. So we would be considered in the US a medium government control state, but the drive is to be like Texas, Idaho, California, Oklahoma, where if you do not give your child to the government has absolutely no authority over them. In what way or not is this appropriate behavior or the right behavior? I don't mean socially acceptable behavior in the UK.
Sean, do you?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. So well done for keeping the thinking time to yourself there, Randall. I think the problem that we face is that the government here has got no compunction at all about being very assertive towards us. And they make statements such as home educators are breeding terrorists. And you know, it has been government policy for many years to create what they call hostile environments towards anything that's politically either unpopular or just not important, but they want to trample. So we unfortunately are faced with that. And in fact, in the current UK home education guidelines, the government has written in an explicit encouragement to local authorities to test the boundaries of case law by prosecuting home educators, and has even written in that you know, a home educator who successfully defends themselves in court should not assume that they'll get their costs, that the government might come after them for it. So, you know, everything is being done to make us give up early. Now, what the one advantage that we are able to play to, I think, is the government's constant surprise that an issue that it considers really quite unimportant, you know, should drive us as a community into a frenzy, you know, and a really very united one. So, you know, when they got a petition a couple of years ago signed by 19,000 home educators, well, that was really a quarter, 1 in 4 of the entire home education community in the UK. Then there's probably more than a quarter 2 years ago. That really put them on the back foot to find out that we were so united and opposed. And as a result, they said, I was present in the Department of Education when the civil servants said it was because of the strength of opposition that we decided not to change the law at that time. So, you know, I think home educators can take that as a triumph, at least in delaying the attack. What I find for local media, they love a photo story, and they love an outrage story of, you know, somebody who has been totally let down by the state and is looking after the child. That's absolutely fine. You know, a picnic in a park in September. They like stories like that. And when it comes to MPs and councillors, the starting point, I think, is most councillors are really very ignorant of the legal position and are assuming that their assumptions are accurate. So we have to spend time correcting that And that can involve quite some confrontation. Like I remember giving a talk to my own local constituency party and explaining to several councillors that we do not need to seek permission from a school to home educate. We simply tell the school that we have decided to do that, you know, apart from some very specific circumstances. And they denied that. Teachers who were councillors denied it to me. And I had to read the section of law to them, which I brought with me, you know, to get them to accept it. So yeah, I think the confrontational approach is probably one which this community would want to delay for a little while, but we will, I guarantee a large number of home educators marching past Parliament, you know, from every corner of the UK, if they decide to push ahead with law. I'm certain of that. And also, sorry, it's just come to my mind, I apologize. We are in the process of setting up a legal defence fund in the UK so that we can aggressively deter attacks on individual home educators if it has the potential to establish case law. So a long answer, but thanks for the question.
I'll be very brief, really. My feeling is, yeah, a quarter of home educators doing that is great, but if we had 50% or 75%, that would be far more. And I think there is a lot of home educators who don't want the bother. And I think that's one of our weaknesses. I don't know what your percentage is in America, Brian, but one of our problems is, and it came up recently, we were talking about it last night.
They do not want what?
The bother, the trouble.
They don't want the trouble. They don't want to get involved with the political side. My English, as opposed to your American. It's also, we were talking about it last night, that with the sudden growth of home educating in this country, mainly from people who've been in school and it's not been working, they certainly don't want any conflict with the home with the authorities. So from our point of view, they're not going to necessarily take a stand, and that is another difficult area. That's all from me. Becky?
Hang on a minute, how do I take that down? I was literally just getting ready to put my hand up to say something in response to that. I try to think back on that to so our children have been out of school for 7 years and coming up 8 years. And I try to think back to when we first came out and how I felt about it, because I met the council workers to start with. And I try to think about the progression that led from me being somebody that would meet somebody from the council to somebody that is creating a project based on that we should retain these rights that we have in law to be able to educate our children without interference, and what led to that along the way, and how can we use kind of media interviews, the radio and stuff, to kind of reach those people that you're talking about, that, you know, that I think they've had, lots of them have had very, very stressful, very hard times. If they've had children in school and they've got to the point where they're willing to take them out of school, rather than it being a philosophical decision that's made at the start, is they've probably by that point had quite a lot of trauma happen to them or their children. And so not wanting to fight is something that you can completely understand, isn't it? Because lots of them have probably been fighting for many years on one thing or another. So I think it's kind of reaching those people, and obviously none of us want to talk for anybody else, but kind of explaining their position as well. It's like kind of talking about the unschooling and the child-led learning and cooperative groups. You want to make sure that you're kind of representing other people when you talk in these interviews, and you know, whatever you happen to be on the radio or newspapers or whatever it happens to be. But it's a difficult one that I think we really kind of need to work on collectively, as Brian was saying about whole groups coming together. I think it's something that we need to address much wider in the community. But can I just, sorry, I'm going to change it a little bit here. I just wanted to say to Harriet, based on that, when you're talking to like the journalists and stuff. So this is going back now, before I started doing this project, I my main job outside of my when I was doing my MA is I'm a birth photographer, and I was the first birth photographer in the UK. And so when I started doing that, I had lots and lots of national press that wanted to talk to me about it, which I thought, yeah, this is great, this is brilliant, they all want to talk to me. And then I kept doing interviews, and I'm like, why are they making me sound like I'm a crazy loon? I don't understand it. Why would they do that? And you learn very quickly, like Monica was saying, that you have to be very careful about the words that you choose. And, you know, I kind of got a little bit, in the end, I felt like maybe they thought that I was going to have memory problems or something like that, because they'd ask me a question, I wouldn't respond straight away. I'd take a little bit to kind of absorb what they've actually said to me. I stopped talking to people on the phone, and I would only let them ask me questions via email so that I could think about exactly what I wanted to say. But one thing that I have done, because with this project, so my work in photography, I've been taking photographs of both my own children and lots of other families as well. Because it's photography, I'm very specific about where it goes and what it's used for, as protecting those families. And so what I've done from the start when I was getting the birth photography in, and this is what I was going to say to Harriet, is once I had realised what the journalists were doing, because let's face it, their job is just to make money for their newspaper or their media outlet or whatever. So first of all, they'll go down the route of they'll write things and they'll take what you've said out of context. So what I started doing was asking for copy, like approval of everything that was being written. So I won't do anything in print now without being given copy approval beforehand. And then I thought, that's it, I've beaten you all. So that's what I started asking for. And then the very next person that did it, I asked, I want copy approval. And then what happened? I get copy approval, it's perfect, it's brilliant, sounds amazing. And the title is Blood and Gore of Home Birth and Birth Photography. And I was like, oh no. So I had asked for copy approval from the journalist of the body of work. But then what I realized you need to do is you need to have copy approval of the title of the work as well, because otherwise that's how they get their clickbait, isn't it? When it's online, that's how they get people to come through. And I don't think, I'm going to be nice, I don't think these people are being awful. I think they need to make sure that those papers keep going back to them to get more work. So, you know, and the people, the editors that are doing the titles, they need to make sure that people are, are clicking on their stuff. So I think it's not, it's obviously the position we're in, it's not always possible to have copy approval for everything, because it's not, and some places just won't give it at all. But it's always worth asking for, because I think even if you ask for it, they know that you know what they're doing, you know what their game is and how they play it. And so actually that kind of works in your favor. That is what I found anyway.
Yeah, and
so there you go, Harriet.
Yeah, I did comment that you might find they go elsewhere as well if they don't want to give copy approval. I see Alison has her hand up. Can I add her to so she can put a question or comment?
Well, it's more a comment, really. It's following on from the session I led last night and the session that Harriet led the day before. And really, it's that we do have a problem in this country, in that when I was a child, it was all right to rebel against things. It was very unusual to have somebody from the council in your house, etc., etc. And we have been led by the nose in this country, and a lot of younger people just think it's perfectly reasonable to have the level of interference that the government are trying to have in our lives. Things are a little different in America, I believe, because they're a lot more about being independent in that way. But we have been very, very carefully conditioned in this country, and a lot of young parents that I meet are far too happy, in my opinion, to have any Tom, Dick or Harry in their house and telling them what to do, etc. And that makes it a bigger battle for us, because when I started home educating in 1999, all the home educators were hippie mavericks, you know, with 2 degrees, and they'd given up worldly goods in order to home educate in world school, and you know, so the people I was immersing myself in and my family in were people who were seasoned in being unusual and were not afraid to be seen to be unusual. The cohort we have now are damaged, like you said, Becky, absolutely traumatized, some of them, absolutely beyond traumatized, let down, beaten down, and have got into the habit, because that's what they've grown up with, of letting the government know everything about them, not understanding the difference between secrecy and privacy as well. That's a really interesting one.
Anyone want to respond?
Very quickly, I put into the chat there.
Yeah.
I understand that, Alison, and there's been a little bit of drift toward that with our generation, my children's generation. However, and this is a little plug for all you organizations who philosophically believe in parental duty, authority, so forth and so on, rather than the government. One of your jobs, and I go every year to the U.S. National Homeschool Leadership Conference. I'm there every year, and I preach and repeat and repeat and repeat. It's the job of organizations to teach philosophy, to teach these things and go over it again and again and again. It's just like with our children. We cannot assume that because we taught our oldest child how an earthworm reproduces, don't want to embarrass you or anything, that just because we taught the oldest child, the second one somehow knows it by osmosis. It's educational. It's like when we've had 120 years of Americans in government-controlled schooling, 87% of them, when you get out of it, you've got to be taught differently. And remember, new children are born every week. You have to keep teaching. That's a job of these organizations. Sorry, that's enough.
Yeah. Just to respond to that, Wendy, Charles Warner, and I run an advice group on Facebook, which is only about technical issues to do with technical and legal issues to do with dealing with local authorities and other similar things. We don't do, little Johnny's not learning to read. How do I make it? None of that happens on our group. Our group is purely the legal stuff, the technical stuff. And it's one of the things that we are very, and Sean will attest to this, is one of the things we're very, very careful about is telling people, if you want to stand up for your rights, we'll help you do it. Here's how to do it. Here's a really nice letter to send in. So we do have several thousand. I think we've had 16,000 people through us in the last few years. So we've trained 16,000 people in how to be a pain in the arse to the local authority. It's not quite the, how many are there? Let's have a look. Oh yeah. No, it isn't. It's something like 72,000. We've got something like 72,000 home educated children in this country right now. So we've got a chunk of them trained. But it is a constant battle, and there is a kickback as well. There is one, I won't say where it is, Sean knows where I'm talking about. There is one particular area where the home educating community has divided into two, along the lines of, well, if we make the local authority happy, they'll leave us alone, and you other people that are sticking up for your rights and telling them to stick to the law are causing problems for us. So we've got a bit of that stupid, immature attitude going on as well. I'm sorry, it is a stupid, immature attitude. I'll call it what it is, and that's really not helping. Plus, there are a few people, and I've been victim of this. I've had to leave my home in the past for a week because some of the people in the home educating community are nasty. Really, really nasty. And I had to leave my home with my children for a week once because I was threatened. I've had death threats because of my campaigning. I've had all sorts of things because of my campaigning, and it's really not nice. So there are a few people out there who are just horrible. They seem to have got less, a fewer though recently. Do you not think, Sean?
I think they're getting older.
Yeah, I think one of the great advantages for you, Alison, is that there's also a view out there that once you've finished home educating, they expect you to get out of the way, whereas I think we should have space for our village elders. But, maybe some of them have made themselves redundant. So.
I do think with some of the negative, so we do have a very negative sort of element that brings down everyone that's trying to do something, basically. And this negative element are also not involved at all in supporting anyone. in home education, pretty much. But I think there is an element where some of that is dying out because it's historic. And as those people, hopefully that will fade, the malice will fade. We've got a hand raised with Joanna, so I'm going to bring her in. Oh, hold on a sec. Let me just bring you in here. Okay, I'll say goodbye to Alison there. Bye, Alison. We'll take Randall off too. Sorry. Okay, Joanna.
Yeah, I found this really interesting. We have a Christian MP in York where I am, and I'm trying to think how I'd maybe one day go but yeah, I feel a bit like, oh, is it safe to be visible? I mean, aren't I better off just not drawing any attention? Obviously you want you want to do some good, but I really love all these videos of formerly home educated kids that are, on the web,
app.
On the app. And I think these need to be visible. We need to have some YouTube channel, podcast that's more like we can refer people. Oh,
I'm working on it.
Yeah.
I'm working on it. We've
Good,
got one.
good,
We've
good,
got
good.
one called the Home Education Channel, and the Home Education Channel. We've been posting a lot of these panel discussions on the political situation, and I'm really happy to put anything else up there to promote. And yes, like the young people talking. Did you have a question, Joanna? I just want to because there's something else in the chat, so I want to.
Well, it was just the suggestion that this exists, and hopefully that the alumni are involved, because some people are more vulnerable because they might actually lose their kids if they say the wrong thing or put their foot in it. Yeah. And
Joanna, you should join the home education. There's an action group. Who knows the name of it offhand? Sean, do you know the name?
I'll get a link to it. I'll put it up in the chat.
Yeah, because we've got an action group for people who want to do more and want to spread the word more. It would be good if you could read that. Sean, I'm going to let you speak, but then I've also got Boa van der Eems from South Africa who would like to share from their experience there. So if you want to go ahead, and then I'll bring Boa in.
Sure. I just wanted to reply to Joanna. The two issues that you have raised there, about you mentioned that your MP is Christian, and you also mentioned fear of drawing attention to yourself, and having your children taken away from you. So an MP in this country is going to be associated with a political party and will have clear political views. And if they're left wing, then the kind of messages that they're likely to respond to will be, for instance, my child was school phobic, was bullied, and I took them out of school for their own protection, and I need to be able to continue doing that. I need more support. And that they may agree with you on that. And if your MP is very right wing, then you might say that you think that state schools are fine for some people, and other people go to public schools, and some people go to boarding schools, and some people have private tutors, and you want to educate your own child, and it's a matter of choice. And they will start nodding their head. I see. If they are Christian, or if they are Muslim, or whatever, there are always reasons why they will feel sympathetic to what you're trying to do, and will maybe not want to adopt your practice, but they will want to endorse your right to practice in that manner. So that's the one thing, now. And when it comes to this question of, I'm scared to talk to them in case I draw attention to myself and they'll take my children off me, your MP is not allowed to share your details with the local authority. Okay, it is like talking to a solicitor. It's an entirely confidential matter. What I would suggest you do, if you want to take the heat off yourself, is that your community, you'll be part of a group of home educators, invite the MP to come and meet all of you at once, right? And make sure that your children are there, just as Brian said earlier, and talk about your different approaches to education and why they're each appropriate to your child. But at the end of the day, you're just asking for the right to be able to provide a personalized education, and at the end of it, they will walk out going, I never knew there were that many ways of educating children. And I can understand that you had a very good reason for taking your child out of school. And I respect that your child never went to school in the first place. You know, they will be so much better informed. But the one thing they cannot do is write to the local authority and say, I met these people today. Now, can you send social services round? Because that's just illegal.
Okay, so
Excellent.
I want to give Bo the floor so he wants to just bring a little bit of information from South Africa.
Yeah, just something small I want to share. I'm from the Legal Defence Fund in South Africa, and yeah, they are currently busy with new legislation. And as that became public, there was a lot of interest from the media. Now, traditionally, then everybody calls the Pestalozzi Trust, the Legal Defence Fund, and a few associations. But very soon, the amount of media requests was more than we could handle. So what we did is we created this group called the Homeschool Ambassador Group. So parents that are willing to speak to the media, we added them to the group, and we then hand out. We got a coordinator that hand out the request for a media interview to people in this group. And by that structure, we could out media the government, because in our case, the education legislation is more a national competency. So the National Department of Education has got 1 or 2 PR people that have to talk about everything, every educational thing, public schools, private schools, everything like, and they know nothing about home education. And we've got a team of 10, 20 people that can talk very well about home education. We can meet every media request from every small radio station and little local paper, where the national department is only available to do big TV media interviews. Then they'll concede to a media interview. So by having a big group of people, you can easily out media the government. That's just my contribution. Thank you.
Oh, that's a great idea, Boa. Thank you. Becky.
Just in response to that, yeah, it is a really good idea, actually, that we should all chat about more. But one thing that we're kind of working on here is that what I think, coming at it from the point of view from the side of the photography, is that what we have a problem with in this country is that when anybody, it's the same as saying they don't talk about home education, they talk about homeschooling. Every image that ever runs with a story on home education is always stereotypical, sat at a table doing work together, parents looking really happy. Like, I've got images like that, obviously I have, but it's reinforcing this belief that to be home educated, you must be creating school at your home. And I think, and also as well, it's always a mom and a dad, and it's always white people. And I think that there is a real issue there with driving these stereotypes of it's white middle class people that home educate. And I think we have a responsibility that when we are talking to people and we're doing these interviews and always supplying imagery, that's something that we're working on. And something that I'm looking at the moment is kind of trying to work out, like, without going into too much detail about it, basically a collective of photography, photographs of people that are willing for them to be shared in the media, so that when the media come and they ask for photographs, that they're not just using Getty Images stock photographs of children with their heads in their hands at school, or, you know, mom and dad sat down at the table with, you know, 2.4 children, all looking like, you know, whatever the media thinks it's supposed to look like. And so I think that's a really good way as well, is if you know anybody that's going to do, or if you are doing a media piece with a journalist and they ask for an image, is thinking about kind of what we are giving them and what they're seeing, because it does, obviously, as we all know, it has kind of this potential. It was like, who was it? It was Monica, wasn't it? That where you were saying that you were trying to talk to, eventually you're just talking to one person, if you can just help one person. And I think when we're supplying images, especially photography, has a really big part to play in making people kind of know that there are alternatives for them and that they are represented in that community as well. So that's where I was going.
I see we've got, so Boa said the physical appearance is especially important on television. And Jana had said we should organize a home ed got talent. And you've got the or Smith, but I'm not sure what that means.
It's short for something.
Oh, or something, okay.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Have a comment, Juliet?
Yes, Brian.
Yeah, real quickly on what Becky just talked about. I put something in chat, but also the organizations have to be really ready, set, go to refer the journalists to whom they want. You know, you've got to have a purpose, all right? So if you want somebody with different, you know, skin color, send them there. You want somebody from a different ethnic background, send them there. You got to be like Johnny on the spot with the media, really, really, really Johnny on the spot. And it's largely up to the organizations to do this. I would say a lot of the homeschool organizations in the US got a little, we call it a kick in the rear here about 5 years ago. And they've been really good at this now, working on that, because there has been a little bit of a, well, not a little bit, more of a stereotype in the US. And it's hard to get rid of stereotypes. For a long time, many in the media and some of the negative academics purposely portrayed home education as white, rich, highly educated, whatever. It's never really been true, but stereotypes are hard to overcome. So you have to work at it very proactively. In fact, the empirical evidence now shows, this is kind of bizarre, but there's some evidence from the federal level that homeschoolers actually on average are a little poorer than average, which really shocks people. But hey, and from the US Census Bureau, it appears that probably homeschooling for overall in the US doubled from about a year ago, but with Black families, there's some evidence that more than it quintupled. So you got to take the empirical evidence and use it and be ready and be quick with the media.
This has all been really helpful. I think we need to start wrapping up so we can at least finish by 8:30. Just having a look. Okay, so I think we do need to organize. I think that much is clear. So we need to organize our information, organize our message, and just have a plan, really, don't we? Sean? You want to add some thoughts there and unmute yourself?
Sorry, I was having a look for the home education calendar that we
to show Brian
this year, and I've just found the link, so I'm going to put it in the chat. And this will open up a PDF of a calendar about home education, and really it kind of brings together a lot of what we've been talking about. It's because it shows photography led. It shows images of people doing real home education, and they're not all sat in a table at a kitchen. It is assertive of our legal rights. It has quotes from people who've been home educated. It has all that stuff, and it might just cheer you up.
Well, tell Brian what we did with it.
Well, we basically produced a very short notice over Christmas with the idea of sending it to MPs and home education officers at local authorities around the country, but also because home educators have had a very hard time for a year. As we all know, we spend some of our time at home, but a lot of our time outside of the home, and because of lockdown, we've all been isolated just like everybody else. So the calendar was also intended to give people a year-long reminder of, what it is to be a home educator and in community and outdoors and everything else. But my secret hope is that some of those MPs or some of those local authority staff will have actually put it on their filing cabinet. And although it took a minute to put it in an envelope, it might sit on their filing cabinet for a year, and that could have a bit of a lasting impact on them. So for those of you who want to download it, the link is in the chat. Just open the chat box.
Oh, there it is. Oh no, is that the link?
It starts off. It's a OneDrive. Oh,
Monica's
it's not in there.
Apologies, I've only sent it to Monica because I was corresponding.
Okay, she sent it. She sent it. Don't worry.
There you go.
Julia.
Yeah, and that will eventually open up a PDF of the document, so you can, you know, enjoy looking at it.
Yes, Brian.
I don't totally understand what this is yet, but it sounds like it's something you could hand to an MP or anybody, right?
Yeah, we were selling them to people who wanted them, but people could also sponsor one to their MP, and we also mailed them to our own MPs, and it's actually really helpful.
Excellent. Yeah. So with some of these booklets on home education research that I've created have gone at least twice into all 535 United States congressmen's files, personally handed to them, and then versions of that or state specific ones have gone into the hands of thousands and thousands of state level legislators. So excellent, Sean, and all of you, whoever did it, excellent.
Okay, Becky, you've got something you want to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, just it was kind of a broad thing outside of this. I was just thinking it would probably be worth doing like a drive for the calendars again, because we've just had the local council elections, haven't we? So it would be good to get some of them sent out to local councillors that are kind of, some of them are going to be new on the job and won't know anything about it. So that could be, it could be a good way, like I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Like Yona, how do you say it?
Joanna.
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 Yeah, there you go, got it. I didn't want to get it wrong. Like Joanna said, that if you're kind of, you know, you're nervous about going to see an MP or a councillor or somebody, you could take, or something, you could take one of these along with you as a starting point for a conversation, couldn't you? So that could be quite good.
Yeah, I think we've got about, I'm trying to think, because they're all hidden in my Girl Guide cupboard in the Civic Hall here, are all these calendars that are left. I think there's about 300 left.
Okay, there's still half a year to go. They can still use them. So one of the other plans we have, Brian, quickly, is that we want to also thinking of having a kind of home education day, a national day, which we might call Joy Baker Day, in honor of Joy Baker, who went to battle with her local authority back in the 50s and 60s, and kind of really set a precedent in many respects for us. So that's something that's on the cards, which we'll be discussing at length. I think we've got another meeting on Saturday about a potential legal defense fund, and we've got 2 more of these political sessions, Friday night, Saturday night. Saturday night will be one where you can find out how you can get involved, and we can talk about your contributions, you know, how you could actually get involved, what you can do. So I think we need to end here, but wow, what a great lively discussion. And I just want to thank Brian just for the help, because I think that's helped us think a little bit more structured, because it is something we battled with a bit, haven't we, Sean, just to kind of find a structure and a focus. And I think you've done that for us. So I want to just give a round of applause to everybody for taking part. And thank you so much for this conversation. And we will see, hopefully, all of you again tomorrow night to carry on the conversation. Thank you. Good night.